Another question that comes up is, what about people who say that I was born this way? Which I think is a fair question. A lot of people say, I didn't have some traumatic experience. I didn't have somebody who made me gay. I've just always been this way. I was born this way. I've never been attracted to the opposite sex. I've always been attracted to the same sex. What do I do about this? Because it leads to another question that says, if God's against it, then why did He make me this way? And I think that's a fair question to ask. You know, through the discovery of DNA and through the discovery of our chromosomes and all of these things that scientists are discovering, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a preacher, but I'm a fan of science, man. I love reading about this stuff. There seems to be a genetic predisposition that we've been able to find and identify that says these types of cursors, these are precursors perhaps to same-sex attraction, or they seem to offer a predisposition for people who have these combinations that seem to be predisposed to same-sex attraction. And there's a lot of reasons for this, all kinds of, you can go online and search it, and some people will give you biological reasons. They'll say that it was some kind of, that your biology is this way, you're just made this way. There seems to be a lot of research that's been done on birth order. This seems to have an effect towards that. And then also a lot of research has been done on hormones in utero before as the baby is developing, and it seems like being washed with a lot of estrogen or a lot of testosterone or other hormones seem to then give a predisposition towards same-sex attraction. Now, my friend told me, he said, I would never choose this. This is not something that I would choose. It's something that I feel like has been imposed on me. And I think that that's a fair assessment. Chromosomal disorders, things that wind up affecting chromosomes, or chemical imbalances, are different from hereditary or recessive inherent traits. Too much estrogen, too much testosterone, while natural, would still be abnormal. And that's quite different from recessive traits, like, that's passed on from parent to parent, like blue eyes or being left-handed or our skin color, things like that. So even though it may be natural, it would still be abnormal. And many people would say, I have always understood that I was just different. I'm not saying different's bad, it's just different. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, I like to go to Romans chapter 5. That says, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. By one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. The Bible says from the very beginning, sin has been being passed on to us. So from Adam's sin, now all of us have become sinners. Not that we became sinners, rather, but we were born sinners. So because of Adam's sin, we've all been born in sin. We all have a predisposition towards sinning. I don't know, that might be on a genetic level. It might be in our DNA. Our DNA is just information, a billion lines of code that say this is who you are. Perhaps there's something that's been recoded in us that makes us with a predisposition towards certain kinds of sins. There's a lot of things that we can say that people are predisposed. We've been able to find genetic predispositions towards anger. You ever hear somebody say, oh, well, that's just how I am. My whole family's always been hot-headed. Or towards predispositions towards alcoholism, or predispositions towards violence, or towards infidelity, or kleptomania, or dishonesty. We've been able to find all kinds of things that point on a genetic level that maybe there's predispositions to those things. On a personal level, my biological father and his entire family, all the men in his family, have had a couple of things that just reoccurred generation after generation after generation. Alcoholism has been a major issue, destroyed most of their lives, and along with the alcoholism winds up coming a lot of violence, particularly towards family members. I experienced that, going through the beatings and through the rejection and all of those things. On my mother's side, the men in her family also had tremendous amounts of alcoholism. So I would say I very likely am predisposed to alcoholism. I'm probably an alcoholic. I just don't drink. So just the fact that I'm predisposed to anger doesn't make it okay for me to be angry. Just because I perhaps have a predisposition towards infidelity does not make it okay for me to cheat on my wife. Just because I have a predisposition towards alcohol does not make it okay for me. That's my excuse to become an alcoholic. Instead, God calls us to a better way. As a matter of fact, just because it's natural, just because it exists in nature, doesn't make it moral. There's a difference between being natural and being moral. There's all kinds of things in nature. People would say, well, homosexuality sometimes shows, same-sex attraction or action shows up in nature sometimes, and they'll point out, monkeys or something. Just because it shows up in nature doesn't make it moral or right. Black widows are cannibalistic, but that doesn't make it, just because it was natural, that doesn't make it moral. I've been to Africa a number of times. I had the opportunity to see lions out there, and I saw a pride of female lions with a whole bunch of cubs, maybe 7 or 8 cubs. And then off about 60, 70 yards away, there was a big male lion, and he was just sunning himself out there. And they had a fresh kill right near them, and the little cubs are rolling around, big fat bellies and all that. Our driver told us it's not uncommon for a younger, dominant male lion to actually eat what he would perceive as being perhaps a dominant cub. So he'll watch the behaviors of the cubs, and if there's a dominant one that seems to be bossy, sometimes that male lion will come and kill that young cub. Just because it's in nature and it's okay doesn't make it, or just because it's in nature and it's natural does not make it moral. Although there have been times when I've looked at my sons and thought, buddy, you better not push me much further. I'd take you out. So there's a lot of things in nature that we see that don't necessarily make it right for us as moral human beings made in the image of God. Then it turns into a big argument about, well, it's my right, just leave me alone, it's none of your business what I do. But I think that you and I can be honest with something, and that is that sexual gratification is not a right. As a matter of fact, the Bible says sexual gratification is a gift from God within the parameters that He designs for us. All moral people believe in limiting sexual gratification. Everybody that would claim some form of morality. Whether it's pedophilia, we would all say, virtually everybody would say, it's not okay for a high school teacher to be sleeping with a 9th grade girl. We would say that abusing children is not moral, that you should limit your sexual gratification in that way because that is immoral. So the greatest issue is when it comes to the moral question about homosexuality, it's not whether or not you're predisposed for it. I'm predisposed towards alcoholism probably. The question is, who gets to say what is moral and what isn't? Do I get to determine what's moral, or does God? And as a Christian, I believe that God does. So God, the Creator, is the one who sets the limits, who limits my personal gratification. And He says, when I make you, I've designed you as the engineer of our life. He's designed us to operate in certain parameters. When we live outside those parameters, that winds up making the world and life not work the way that He originally designed. He designed sexuality for the purpose of procreation and for the enjoyment of a husband and a wife. When we operate outside of that, God says that's not acceptable. So then I'll have people come and ask me, okay, Jeff, I want to please God. I have this attraction, but I want to please God with my life. What is the right way? God does not say He's going to judge you because of your attraction. God says that the sin is in the behavior. It's in the way that we choose to gratify the desire. So it turns out that celibacy can be an act of worship, and that's not unreasonable. In talking with homosexual friends and saying it's not wrong for you to be sexually attracted to another person of the same sex, it's wrong for you to act on it. That's no different than me saying to the high school football quarterback, don't sleep with the head cheerleader. God says that all sex outside of the God-ordained marriage between a man and a woman is outside of what God says is moral. So saying to a young couple, God says to refrain from that, that's an act of worship, is the same as speaking to a homosexual couple saying you choose to hold back from that area, and that winds up being honoring to God. As a matter of fact, the Bible says this in Romans chapter 7. Now, regarding the questions that you asked in your letter, yes, it's good to live a celibate life. But because there's so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. Right? And they should fulfill one another's needs. But then Paul goes on and says this. Paul was a single man and he was celibate. And he said, I wish everyone were single just as I am. But God gives to some the gift of marriage and to others the gift of singleness. So I say to those who aren't married, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am. He said, man, you can worship God and honor God and serve God on a much higher level if you're not distracted with the things of life, the marriage and all those other things. You can choose to focus completely on God. Then it takes us to this final thing. When I said that celibacy can be an act of worship to God, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 says, I beg you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is your reasonable act of worship. Isn't that interesting? He says that you can give your life, give your body as a living sacrifice. God, I choose to sacrifice this natural desire to you as an act of worship for you. In the same way that I choose to be a teetotaler. I don't drink at all. I'm a dry guy. I don't drink alcohol as an act of worship. Do I think it's a sin to have a sip? Nope, I don't. But because I know that I have a predisposition towards alcoholism, I choose not to drink at all. I have a lot of young college men that are wanting to honor God with their lives, in their sexuality. And so while they are very attracted to young ladies, they choose to keep themselves apart from that until they come to a day when God gives them a bride, perhaps. I have a number of people at Heritage Church that claim to be from a homosexual background that still have very strong same-sex attraction. And each one of them have come to me on their own and said, Jeff, I choose to give this to God as my reasonable act of worship. I choose to give my body as a living sacrifice. So I can't say, well, just because it's natural, it's moral. That's not true. I can't say just because I have a predisposition for it, then God made me that way. God did not make me a liar. God did not make me hot-headed. God did not make me an alcoholic. God did not make me with a predisposition towards same-sex attraction. All of those things are a result of that original sin, and sin just winds up being passed on to us. Instead, God says there's a better way. Give all of your life to me as a living sacrifice. That's a reasonable act of worship.